Welcome to Quiet Historian, where we close our eyes, listen, and fall asleep to quiet history. I'm your narrator for the night, equal parts history nerd and pillow enthusiast. Tonight, we drift back to the edge of history, a moment when the world stood still, waiting to see if dawn would ever come again. It is October 1962. The Cold War, once fought in words and warnings, now teeters on the brink of annihilation. In Cuba, Soviet missiles rise silently from tropical soil. In Washington, American planes circle the skies, searching for proof of what everyone already fears. In secret rooms, Kennedy and Khrushchev exchange messages carved in restraint, each man aware that one misstep could erase the world within minutes. Across oceans and time zones, soldiers wait for orders that never come, their fingers resting inches from the buttons that could end civilization. For one long week, the air itself feels heavier, every breath measured, every hour uncertain, every decision alive with consequence. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from tonight. I'm always amazed by the places people tune in. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath in, and let it out. Because once this story begins, chances are you'll be asleep before it ends. You wake to a quiet world that does not yet know how close it stands to ending. It is October 1962, the season when the Cold War stops being a metaphor. The leaves outside your window fall like slow-motion warnings. Children walk to school beneath skies that carry the invisible weight of nuclear possibility. The radios speak softly of politics, but no one really hears the danger forming behind the words. In Washington, President John F. Kennedy reads a set of photographs taken from the edge of heaven. They show long gray shadows in a Cuban field, missile launches, Soviet-made, aimed directly at the United States. Each shape on the film means the potential end of cities: New York, Washington, Atlanta. He sets the pictures down and closes his eyes. For a moment, he says nothing. Then he whispers, "We're now in business." The business, of course, is survival. The discovery begins 8 days that will hold the planet hostage. U-2 spy planes glide above the Caribbean, cameras clicking like heartbeats. Beneath them in Cuba, Soviet engineers work quietly among sugarcane and coral dust, unaware that their secret is already known. You imagine the stillness of that island morning, the rustle of palms, the scent of diesel and wet soil, and somewhere in it, the hum of warheads being raised. History often begins with ordinary weather. When Kennedy calls his brother Robert into the Oval Office, the tone is quiet, almost domestic. The president speaks slowly, weighing each word like it might be his last. "These missiles," he says, "change everything." They both know that the presence of Soviet nuclear weapons in Cuba is more than a threat. It is a humiliation. The United States has Jupiter missiles in Turkey, aimed at Moscow, but this feels different. It feels personal. It feels like the world is looking right back. The president gathers his most trusted advisors, the executive committee of the National Security Council. They are called ex-com. The men arrive in dark suits and careful expressions, the way men walk into history without realizing it. They will meet in secret for the next 13 days. You can almost hear the scratch of pens, the creak of chairs, the muffled air conditioning in the cabinet room. Outside, Washington is golden with autumn, but inside that room, the light is colder. The air smells faintly of cigarettes and dread. Some want to bomb Cuba immediately. Others plead for restraint. Every option carries the possibility of global annihilation. Kennedy listens more than he speaks. He takes notes in longhand, writes in the margins of memos. He asks, "What happens if we strike first?" And no one answers, because everyone knows. If America attacks Cuba, the Soviets will respond in Berlin, or worse, directly against the United States. He decides on a middle path, a naval blockade, but he calls it a quarantine. The word sounds gentler, more diplomatic, less like war. In truth, it is an act of confrontation, a steel ring around an island of fire. Ships from the US Navy move silently into position across the Atlantic, like chess pieces closing in on a single square. In Moscow, Nikita Khrushchev reads Kennedy's ultimatum and feels the blood rise behind his temples. He believes he is protecting Cuba from invasion, not provoking the end of the world. But he also knows that power, once shown, cannot be withdrawn without cost. He writes furious letters, half diplomacy, half desperation. We must not be pushed by passion or arrogance, he warns, but by reason. Reason, however, is in short supply that week. You picture the Atlantic that night, flat and endless, with destroyers cutting silent wakes across black water. Men on those ships do not know if they will be alive by morning. They follow orders, eat their rations, and stare at radar screens glowing pale green in the dark. Somewhere out there, Soviet submarines move too, deeper and quieter than thought itself. Their captains have instructions. If attacked, use the nuclear torpedoes. The world breathes shallowly. There are no front lines now, only concentric circles of fear. Each side imagines the other's buttons, the other's hands trembling just slightly above them. When Kennedy finally addresses the nation, he does so with the steadiness of a man trying not to wake a sleeping giant. You can hear the calm in his voice, the effort to sound unbreakable. He explains that the United States will not tolerate nuclear weapons in Cuba. He demands their removal. Every television in America flickers the same black and white truth. The world is officially one step from nuclear war. In Havana, Fidel Castro listens to the speech with clenched fists. He feels betrayed by Khrushchev, cornered by Kennedy, trapped between superpowers who talk about Cuba like it is a chessboard and not a country. He orders his anti-aircraft crews to stand ready. For 7 days, Soviet freighters continue steaming toward the blockade line. Each mile they travel could ignite Armageddon US Navy pilots fly low, counting ships through binoculars. The code word if missiles are launched is simple and final. High card. No one wants to hear it. On October 25th, the UN Security Council meets. The world watches as Ambassador Adlai Stevenson confronts the Soviet delegate. His voice is polite, but edged like a blade. He demands to know whether the Soviets have placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. When the delegate denies it, Stevenson slams down the evidence, photographs from the U-2s. He says, "I am prepared to wait until hell freezes over for your answer." Silence fills the room. The lie is exposed. By now, Kennedy has not slept properly in days. He eats little. His brother Robert keeps watch beside him, pacing the corridors, weighing every word that might save the world. They both understand that a single misstep could mean the death of millions. In the skies above, another U-2 pilot named Rudolf Anderson takes off on a routine reconnaissance mission. He never returns. A Soviet surface-to-air missile hits his plane, and Anderson becomes the first and only combat fatality of the crisis. In the White House, when the news arrives, no one speaks. They just look at one another. The world has never been closer to ending. In Moscow, the mood turns cold and electric. Khrushchev sits at his dacha, surrounded by maps, telegrams, and half-empty teacups. The news of the downed American pilot reaches him through clenched messengers. He stares at the report, his hand shaking slightly, and mutters, "Now, things have gone too far." He knows Kennedy will have to respond, and that response could destroy everything. The Kremlin corridors echo with hurried footsteps. Every advisor brings a new theory, a new warning. Some urge a strike before the Americans do. Others beg for negotiation. The air smells of tobacco and fear. Khrushchev retreats into silence. He thinks of the millions of Soviet families still rebuilding after the Second World War. He remembers what real annihilation looks like. For all his bluster, he does not want to repeat it. And so, late that night, he drafts a letter. The message is personal, almost pleading. He tells Kennedy that if the United States promises not to invade Cuba, the missiles will be removed. He writes not like a dictator, but like a man trying to pull his country back from the edge of a cliff. The letter is long, emotional, and filled with contradictions. It is both an admission and an offer. When the letter arrives in Washington, Kennedy reads it slowly, line by line. He feels, for the first time in a week, a crack of daylight through the storm. He senses sincerity in Khrushchev's tone. He believes they might be near the end. But before he can respond, a second message arrives. This one is shorter, harsher, and clearly written under military pressure. It demands that the United States also remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey. If not, the Soviets will not withdraw from Cuba. Kennedy stares at the new message and feels the light dim again. The room grows heavy with disappointment. Now, There are two Khrushchevs, one that wants peace and one that cannot back down. The president's advisors split in the same way. The hawks call for airstrikes, the doves beg for patience. Every voice echoes the same impossible question. Which message do we answer? The president's brother, Robert, becomes his mirror. He speaks softly, thinking out loud more than arguing. If we can find a way to reply to the first letter, he says, we might give them a path out. Kennedy nods, eyes unfocused, calculating. They agree to ignore the second letter publicly, while quietly offering a private deal about Turkey through back channels. The hours drag on. In the streets of Washington, people line up outside churches. Priests give sermons about forgiveness and fate. Families prepare basements with flashlights and canned food. Children draw maps of fallout shelters in their school notebooks. The world has become a single heart beating, too fast. That Saturday evening, October 27th, will later be called Black Saturday. It is the most dangerous day in human history. The blockade line tightens. U.S. warships signal to Soviet submarines to surface. One of them, B-59, does not respond. Inside that submarine, cut off from Moscow, the crew believes war has already begun. The heat is unbearable. The oxygen is thin. The captain, Valentin Savitsky, believes his ship is under attack. He orders the use of a nuclear torpedo. To launch, 3 officers must agree. 2 say yes. 1 says no. His name is Vasili Arkhipov. He argues, pleads, demands that they surface instead. He wins. 1 man prevents the beginning of nuclear war. That night, the president receives word that a nuclear launch was narrowly avoided. He closes his eyes and whispers, God help us all. He knows there are only hours left before someone, somewhere, miscalculates again. Back in Moscow, Khrushchev reads new intelligence reports suggesting American invasion forces are mobilizing in Florida. He knows that if Cuba falls, the Soviet Union will lose face across the world. But if he doesn't back down, millions will die. He has to choose between humiliation and extinction. In Havana, Castro cannot sleep. He writes his own letter to Khrushchev urging a nuclear strike if the United States invades. It is an act of desperation, not strategy. He believes death preferable to submission. He does not yet realize how close the superpowers are to vaporizing him with the rest of the planet. Kennedy spends that night in the Oval Office, staring at the maps. Red lines for missile ranges, blue circles for population centers. Each one represents millions of living souls. He has never looked more alone. At dawn on Sunday, October 28th, the teletype machines begin to chatter. A new message is coming in from Moscow. This one is short, clear, and final. Khrushchev agrees to remove the missiles from Cuba in exchange for a U.S. pledge not to invade and a quiet understanding about Turkey. the deal is done. Kennedy exhales slowly. No applause, no victory cry, just relief, the kind that feels like falling asleep after days without rest. His aides step out of the room to cry in private. Robert Kennedy writes in his notes, "There is no joy in this, only a sense of utter exhaustion." Around the world, the news spreads like sunrise. In London, church bells ring. In Paris, people embrace in cafes. In New York, traffic slows, as if the city itself is pausing to breathe. And in Moscow, Khrushchev pours himself tea, his hands trembling with age and relief. He has saved the world and lost some of his power doing it. Castro feels betrayed, excluded from the deal that spared his island. He walks the corridors of Havana like a ghost among celebrations. He knows Cuba will never again trust either giant. The revolution survives, but the price is permanent vigilance. When Kennedy steps outside the White House that evening, the air feels lighter, cooler. The trees move gently in the October wind. He tells an aide, "We were lucky this time." He does not say the rest of what he's thinking, that luck is not a strategy. That night, television screens glow with the president's address announcing the peaceful resolution. He speaks with the voice of a man who has looked over the edge and decided to live. He thanks the American people for their calm and courage. He calls it a victory for reason. But everyone listening understands what it really was, a miracle. In the weeks that followed, the world pretended to return to normal. Headlines grew smaller. Newscasters smiled again. But beneath the surface, something in the human spirit had shifted. The crisis had lasted 13 days. For 13 days, the world existed in the narrow space between heartbeat and silence, and when the danger passed, everyone exhaled, but no one forgot. In Washington, Kennedy's approval soared. He had faced the ultimate test and chosen restraint over destruction. But privately, he understood how fragile that restraint had been. He confided to an aide, "It wasn't power that saved us, it was fear." He never forgot how close that fear had come to becoming light. In Moscow, Khrushchev's relief turned into reckoning. The Soviet leader's gamble had failed. He had tried to protect Cuba and project strength, but he had only exposed his weakness. Within 2 years, he would be removed from power, replaced by men who spoke more softly but trusted less. Even his own generals whispered that he had blinked. They could not see that blinking had saved them. In Havana, Fidel Castro stood on the Malecon seawall, watching the waves break against the shore. Cuba remained defiant, but scarred. The revolution had survived, though its sovereignty had become a bargaining chip between superpowers. Castro vowed never again to depend on anyone's protection. He would live the rest of his life under the shadow of that lesson. The United States quietly removed its missiles from Turkey months later, as promised in the secret deal. The world never knew the details at the time. It was diplomacy written in invisible ink. Both nations claimed victory. Both knew they had almost destroyed everything. In the White House, Kennedy began to change. The crisis had taught him the limits of control and the unbearable weight of command. He spoke more often about peace, about the need for dialogue with enemies. He told his advisors, "We have to learn to live together, or we will die together." The experience led to the creation of a direct hotline between Washington and Moscow, a simple red phone linking the two most dangerous men on Earth. It was not a symbol of trust, but of survival. It ensured that next time there would be no days of guessing, no silence before the end. Historians would later call it the closest humanity ever came to annihilation. Physicists calculated that if war had broken out, hundreds of millions would have died in the first hour. The planet itself would have darkened under the ash of burning cities. But those calculations came later, when people felt safe enough to be horrified. In 1963, Kennedy delivered a speech at American University, calling for a world, not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men. His voice was gentler now. He spoke not like a politician, but like a man who had seen the abyss and refused to forget it. He began negotiating the Limited Test Ban Treaty, ending nuclear testing in the atmosphere. For a moment, the world exhaled again. But the fear never truly left. It moved underground, into silos, into submarines, into the quiet of strategic command rooms. The Cold War continued, colder than before, haunted by the memory of October. Each new confrontation carried the echo of that week when reason barely survived its own reflection. For those who had lived through it, life afterward felt borrowed. People in every nation had stared at the same horizon, wondering if sunrise would still come. And when it did, they saw the world differently, fragile, luminous, and undeserved. Children born in the 1960s grew up with that memory inherited like a quiet scar. Decades later, when the archives opened and the transcripts of XCOM were released, listeners heard the tension in the room. The arguments, the pauses, the uncertain breaths. Kennedy's voice steady, but not calm. Each man in that room had felt history pressing down like gravity. And all of them had realized that no ideology, no map, no pride was worth the price of the planet. The tapes revealed that Kennedy often turned to his brother in silence, searching for clarity in his eyes. Robert would nod slightly, as if to say, "Keep walking." Together, they walked the edge of human history and somehow didn't fall. It was not heroism, it was endurance. When Vasili Arkhipov story finally emerged years later, the man who refused to launch, the world barely knew his name. He died in 1998, quietly, without fame or wealth. But his refusal that day, deep beneath the ocean, had saved the species. Sometimes history is written by men no one sees. As the years passed, the photographs of those 13 days turned sepia with time. Faces once drawn tight with fear began to fade. The Cold War itself ended not with fire, but fatigue. Yet the lesson of October 1962 endured, that survival requires imagination as much as courage. You imagine the White House that final night, the clocks ticking softly, the lamps dimmed, a man alone at his desk, knowing the world will never quite trust itself again. Outside, autumn leaves fall in silence, as if remembering. For one brief week, humanity held its breath, and when it exhaled, the air was never the same again. You wake to the sound of metal breathing. It's a deep, weary sound, a wail made of iron. The pressure hull around you creaks and sighs with every shift of the sea. You are 300 feet beneath the Atlantic, inside Soviet submarine B-59. The air is thick with sweat, diesel, and the sour sweetness of carbon dioxide. The thermometer nailed to the bulkhead is stopped at 122 degrees Fahrenheit. No one bothers to look at it anymore. The lights flicker. Men lie half-conscious in their bunks, uniforms soaked through. The electric fans have slowed to a lazy wheeze, pushing only the smell of exhaustion. You can taste the metal in every breath. Outside, the ocean presses in like a thought you can't escape. Somewhere above, American destroyers circle, dropping what they call practice depth charges, tiny explosions meant to force you to surface. To you, each one feels like judgment. The hull trembles, bolts rattle in their sockets. Someone mutters a prayer he swore he'd forgotten. You are told nothing from Moscow. The radio has been silent for days. The world could already be at war, and you would not know. The captain paces the control room, his boots striking the deck like punctuation. Valentin Savitsky, short, sharp-eyed, carrying the look of a man who has already decided to die properly. Another blast rolls through the sub, closer this time. Panels shake. A light bulb pops with a flash of blue. Savitsky grips the chart table and shouts through the heat. They're trying to kill us. His voice cracks. He turns toward his officers. Prepare the special weapon. The words drop into the room like stones into still water. Every man knows what special weapon means. A nuclear torpedo, 15 kilotons of fire in a steel shell. It waits in the forward tube, its warhead sleeping under layers of oil and ritual secrecy. One order, one key turned, and the ocean would glow. The political officer, Ivan Maslenikov, salutes without hesitation. He believes the Americans have already started the war. He believes duty is obedience. And then there is you, Flotilla Commander Vasili Arkhipov, the third man required to authorize the launch. You feel the heat crawling up your neck like a warning. Savitsky leans close, eyes burning. They've attacked us. We'll die, but we'll sink them first. His breath smells of metal and panic. You look at him and see not madness, but certainty. the kind that kills empires. Your memory drifts to the submarine K-19 a year earlier, the one they called the Widowmaker. You had stood on its deck as engineers fought to cool a melting reactor. 8 men died of radiation burns to save the rest. You can still see the way their hands glowed under the Geiger counter. That memory has followed you here. It whispers, "Not again." You wipe the sweat from your forehead. "Comrade Captain," you say quietly, "we have no confirmation from Moscow. The Americans may be signaling, not attacking." Savitsky slams his fist on the table. "You think these are signals? They're explosions." The sub groans in reply, as if taking sides. Around you, gauges flicker in red. The sonar operator reports multiple contacts above, warships on all sides. The navigation lights dim to conserve power. Every man on board understands what comes next. If you launch, you die a hero. If you surface, you might live, but you might be wrong. You feel your pulse behind your eyes. Your hands tremble. The world above is heat and thunder. The world below is silence. Between them is you. You whisper to yourself, "We do not launch blind." The heat inside the submarine has become a creature of its own. It prowls the narrow corridors, curling around shoulders, slipping beneath collars, turning breath into steam. The air tastes of copper and oil. Every surface sweats. In that furnace of steel, nerves begin to fray like old rope. The special weapon lies forward, cradled inside its launch tube. A torpedo, 7 meters of metal patience, its nose sealed with a 15-kiloton nuclear warhead. The crew calls it the last argument. It has never been fired. It was never meant to be fired without direct orders from Moscow, yet Moscow has gone silent. Captain Savitsky stands beside the weapons console, veins rising in his neck. He wipes his forehead with the back of his sleeve, leaving a streak of grease. His voice is hoarse but certain. "We cannot die down here like rats." He turns to political officer Maslenikov, who nods quickly, loyal, frightened, convinced the world above is already ash. 2 of 3 keys are ready. Vasili Arkhipov remains still. His uniform clings to his back, dark with sweat. He stares at the torpedo chart as if reading a moral equation. Launch equals millions dead. Weight equals mutiny and shame. The numbers do not add up to reason, only consequence. He closes his eyes and thinks of light, sunlight, not firelight. A memory surfaces like a ghost. K-19, the summer of 1961. A reactor leak, a hiss that became a scream. He remembers the sailors who crawled into the reactor compartment with rags tied over their mouths, tightening valves with hands that blistered and peeled. They saved the ship, but died glowing. That day, he learned the cost of panic dressed as courage. The submarine shudders again. Another depth charge detonates somewhere above, a muffled hammer against the hull. Sparks leap from a control panel. Someone curses softly. Savitsky snaps. You see? They are destroying us. His hand hovers near the order lever. Arkhipov steps forward. His tone is calm, almost weary. Comrade Captain, we have no confirmation of war. If we launch, we start one. The Americans may only be signaling us to surface. Maslenikov interrupts. They wouldn't risk their ships for games. They attack. We answer. The air quivers with that single word. Answer. Arkhipov shakes his head. He speaks slower now, forcing every syllable through the heat. If we fire, we do not answer. We end everything. Savitsky slams his fist into the chart table. Pencils jump. Better to die with honor. The echo of the word honor clatters down the corridor like shrapnel. Silence follows. Only the hum of failing ventilation, the faint drip of condensation from the ceiling. Arkhipov meets the captain's eyes, tired blue staring into furious gray. He says quietly, "Let us think like sailors, not martyrs." No one moves. A minute stretches into an hour. The crew watches, waiting for history to choose a side. Finally, Arkhipov reaches for the intercom. Cease launch preparation. Maintain depth. His voice does not tremble. Savitsky glares, but does not stop him. The torpedo remains sleeping in its tube. The launch keys return to their hooks. A few men exhale for the first time in minutes. Maslenikov looks away, ashamed of his relief. Arkhipov removes his cap and runs a hand through his soaked hair. "Prepare to surface," he orders. No one cheers. No one dares. In that furnace of steel, the decision feels less like victory and more like mercy. The heat has become unbearable. It presses down like an invisible hand, squeezing every breath until lungs feel paper thin. The men have stopped wiping the sweat from their faces. They simply let it fall. Condensation drips from the overhead pipes, striking the metal deck in slow, steady beats that sound like a clock running out of time. Savitsky grips the edge of the chart table. His knuckles are white, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched as though he could bite through history itself. He stares at Arkhipov and shouts, "They're hunting us. You want to surface like cowards?" Each word reverberates against the steel, echoing in the crew's minds long after his voice stops. Arkhipov stands motionless. He looks not at the captain, but at the small brass clock mounted above the sonar console. It ticks with slow defiance, measuring seconds that feel like years. "Every weapon has two ends, Captain," he says quietly. "If we launch, the world launches back." Maslenikov steps forward, his face red with heat and ideology. "Comrade Arkhipov, you question orders. We have a duty to the motherland." Arkhipov turns, his expression almost kind. "The motherland," he says softly, "will not survive a sun made of fire." The words land like small stones in deep water. The crew avoids eye contact. They can feel the choice hanging in the air, whether to die now or to live and risk dishonor. No one wants to be the first to move. Steam hisses from a vent above them, wrapping the room in ghostly mist. It smells of salt and fear. Savitsky slams his fist again, shouting until his voice breaks. "You think the Americans will spare us? They're dropping bombs. You want to wait until they crush us like sardines?" Arkhipov answers evenly. "If they wanted us dead, we'd already be dead." His calm infuriates the captain more than argument ever could. Another explosion rattles the submarine. The lights dim. For a moment, the room glows only from the red emergency bulbs. Faces look carved from blood and shadow. The deck vibrates. Someone whispers a prayer in Ukrainian. Someone else starts humming, just to hear a human sound. Arkhipov takes a slow step toward the captain. His voice drops to a near whisper. "Valentin, think of your crew. These men trust you. Don't make their families ghosts for nothing." Savitsky's breathing grows shallow. His anger is cracking at the edges, exposing exhaustion beneath. For a long minute, neither man speaks. The submarine hums like a held note. Arkhipov glances toward the crew. No one will call us cowards for choosing life. He reaches for the intercom microphone and lifts it from its cradle. "Cease attack preparation. Flood the ballast tanks. We surface." His voice carries the steadiness of command, the kind that doesn't shout because it doesn't need to. No one breathes, then the helmsman nods. "Aye, Comrade Commander." A lever is pulled. Valves hiss open. Water gurgles through the pipes like the beginning of rain. Savitsky slumps into the nearest chair, face buried in his hands. He doesn't object again. The decision has already been made, and somehow everyone feels both relief and grief. They have refused to end the world, and yet it feels as though something inside them has already died. Arkhipov leans against the bulkhead, eyes closed, sweat glistening on his temples. He whispers something no one hears, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a promise. Above them, the sea waits, and far beyond the waves, the rest of humanity keeps breathing, unaware that its heartbeat now belongs to the silence of one submarine. Vasili Arkhipov, the man who saved the world. The order travels through the submarine like a pulse. Valves open, ballast tanks hiss, and the ship groans as air escapes its lungs. Water rushes out, gravity tilts. Metal moans in protest, then begins to rise. For hours the crew had only known darkness, the weight of the sea pressing from every side. Now the light is returning, first as a faint gray whisper through the periscope, Then, as a widening glow, the hull creaks as if uncertain whether to believe in hope. Arkhipov stands at the center of the control room, his hand resting on the railing. His face is expressionless, but every man watches him as though he alone holds the permission to breathe. He doesn't speak, he only listens to the shifting of pressure, to the murmurs of mechanics, to the slow heartbeat of ascent. The sonar operator calls out contact reports. Multiple destroyers circling like wolves. Their propellers carve the sea above into a low thunder. One of them, the USS Beale, moves directly overhead, dropping more depth charges, not lethal, but close enough to feel. Each blast shudders through the steel and rattles the nerves of every man aboard. Archipov's voice remains calm. Keep rising. Do not respond. No aggressive action. The words feel absurd in such noise, yet they anchor the crew. Discipline is sometimes just quiet, repeated often enough. The submarine breaks the surface at dusk. The sea bursts against the conning tower, cascading over metal in sheets of light. Men squint against a brilliance they'd almost forgotten, the color of the world beyond fear. The hatch opens. Fresh air floods in, thick with salt and the smell of oil from the American ships. For a moment, no one moves. They simply inhale, dizzy with relief. Then Arkhipov climbs up the ladder into the open night. The sky above him is enormous, painted with stars, indifferent and ancient. On the horizon, searchlights sweep across the waves. An American destroyer looms barely half a kilometer away, its guns trained, but silent. Through binoculars, U.S. sailors see the Soviet flag rise slowly on the periscope mast. They wait for an order that never comes. Arkhipov stands on the bridge, the wind flattening his soaked uniform. He lifts a signal lamp, sending a brief coded message of identification. No threat, no hostility. The destroyer answers with a single beam of white light, a cautious acknowledgement that could mean anything, but neither side fires. Down below, the crew listens to the distant clanging of chains and engines from above, the ordinary machinery of life continuing. A few men begin to cry, quietly, without shame. Their tears cool before they reach their chins. They have not won, yet they have not died. Arkhipov stays on deck until dawn. He watches the eastern sky fade from black to violet, then to the faint silver of morning. The sea smells clean again. A seagull circles once overhead, impossibly high, as if confirming that the world still exists. Inside the control room, the captain says nothing. He lights a cigarette with shaking hands, the smoke curling upward like a confession. No one mentions the torpedo. They all know what almost happened, and that silence is its own kind of prayer. By noon, contact is made through emergency radio. Moscow orders B-59 to return home immediately. The crew receives the transmission in exhausted disbelief. Only Arkhipov answers, "Understood." He lowers the antenna, sets the course north, and watches the sea close over what might have been the end of everything. The voyage home is long and silent. No one speaks above a whisper, as if loud voices might summon back the apocalypse they narrowly avoided. The submarine moves north through black water, engines humming low and tired, the sound of a machine that has seen too much. Arkhipov sits alone in his cabin. A single light bulb swings gently with the roll of the sea. On the small metal table before him lies a notebook, a pencil, and a photograph of his wife, Olga. He stares at the photo until his eyes burn. It is not victory he feels, only the immense gravity of what did not happen. He writes nothing. How could words contain the moment he said no to the end of the world? There is no form in the Navy for prevented nuclear war. There is only paperwork for insubordination. When B-59 finally docks at the Northern Fleet base, the crew steps onto the pier, blinking like men emerging from myth. Officials wait with notebooks, questions, and cold eyes. No one congratulates them. They are interrogated for days about why they surfaced, why they hesitated, why they failed to launch. Savitsky, worn and gray, answers mechanically. Maslenikov repeats the official line. The situation was unclear. Arkhipov says little. He has learned that truth often travels slower than rumor. He simply states, "I believed it was not war." It sounds small, almost meek, but those 7 words carry the weight of continents. The officer's report is filed and sealed. The event disappears into classified archives, buried beneath the vast machinery of Cold War secrecy. Even the men who were there rarely speak of it. History has a way of losing the quietest heroes. Years pass. The world spins through more crises, more brinkmanship, more near misses. But none come closer than that October night beneath the Caribbean Sea. Arkhipov remains in the Navy, later commanding a training school, living a modest life far from politics. He never writes a memoir, never seeks recognition. When his story finally surfaces decades later, long after his death, historians will call him the man who saved the world. It sounds poetic, but he would have hated it. He did not think of himself as a savior, only as a sailor trying not to make a terrible mistake. He would have said that anyone, given the choice, should do the same. The truth, of course, is that most wouldn't. Most would have followed orders, fired the torpedo, and let fate do the rest. But Vasili Arkhipov, in the hottest room on earth, chose doubt over destruction. He trusted reason in a place built for fear, and in doing so, he saved everything that could still be dreamed of. The ocean keeps its secrets. No monuments rise from the seafloor for him. Only currents whisper through steel wrecks, carrying faint echoes of choices made in darkness. Somewhere in that eternal hum, his name drifts like a note in the deep, unheard but still resonant. Above the world sleeps peacefully under the same stars that once burned above a submarine poised to end it all. And perhaps that too is a kind of monument. The unbroken sky, the unspoken gratitude, the silence that endures because one man refused to break it. The hum of engines fades into the soft static of memory. The crisis is over, but the lesson remains. Above the Caribbean Sea, the crisis unravels in slow motion. On October 28, 1962, messages flash between Moscow and Washington faster than breath. A deal is struck. Soviet missiles will be withdrawn from Cuba in exchange for an American promise not to invade and a quiet removal of US missiles from Turkey. No one calls it surrender. They call it understanding. In the White House, President Kennedy leans back in his chair, exhausted. The world is still here, but barely. His brother Robert walks in, places a glass of water beside him, and says only, "That was too close." Kennedy doesn't answer. He stares out the window, where dawn has begun to touch the edge of the Potomac, and whispers, "Let's make sure it never gets that close again." Across the ocean, Khrushchev sits in his dacha, hands trembling over a radio. He has just ordered his ships to turn back. In his pocket is the note he wrote hours earlier to Kennedy, calling him a sensible man. He knows the Politburo will see this as weakness, but weakness, he thinks, is a luxury compared to extinction. Both men know how easily it could have gone the other way. A misread radar, a faulty wire, one overzealous commander at sea, and then nothing. No negotiations, no history, no human voice left to remember the reason. The distance between survival and ruin turned out to be no larger than the space between two words: launch or wait. The B-59 surfacing won't be mentioned in official reports for decades. When it finally is, historians will trace the near apocalypse backward, through memos, intercepted transmissions, declassified documents, and arrive at a single point of light beneath the ocean. A man standing in the dark, refusing to mistake fear for duty. It is a strange kind of heroism, not the kind that charges, but the kind that resists, the kind that whispers no when the world screams yes. The sea remembers him. In that same stretch of water, dolphins leap through silver dawns, unaware that they swim through a place once balanced on the edge of erasure. The air above carries no trace of the fire that almost came, only the sound of waves, endless and unconcerned, as if forgiveness has already begun. Back in Moscow, Arkhipov returns home to Olga. He doesn't tell her everything, just that it was difficult, that he's glad to see the sky again. She touches his hand and notices how thin he's become, how far away his eyes seem. Later that night, while he sleeps, she lights a small candle by the window. Outside, snow begins to fall, slow and silent, covering the city like a sigh. Time moves on. The Cold War stretches for decades more, filled with new crises and new brinkmanship, each one born of the same fragile balance between pride and fear. But beneath it all, somewhere in the archives of fate, lies the echo of one decision, an invisible hinge that history swung upon. It remains one of humanity's quietest victories, not a battle won, but a catastrophe undone. In the end, there is no monument grand enough for the moment the world did not end. No parade marches for restraint. No medals are pinned for patience. Yet the silence that followed, the continued hum of hearts and radios and breathing, became the greatest celebration imaginable. If you step outside on a still night and listen to the wind, you can almost hear it, the low, steady pulse of a planet that nearly forgot itself, now grateful simply to endure. That sound is not history, it's gratitude, and it whispers through every dawn that came after 1962.